The first snow of November dusted the clearing as Elena hammered the last notch into another log. Her 5-year-old son Daniel stood nearby, his small mittened hands clutching a wooden stake like it was a treasure. "Mama, why round?" he asked, for the 100th time, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. Elena paused, wiping sawdust from her face, and smiled down at him. "Because circles are strong, mijo, the strongest shape in nature. Mr. Carson says we're crazy." Elena's smile faded. She looked across the snowy field toward the neighbouring farm where Tom Carson and his wife Beth lived. Their traditional rectangular farmhouse stood solid and proper, smoke curling from its brick chimney. Just yesterday, Tom had driven his truck up to the clearing, shaken his head at her construction, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Lady, I've been building in Oklahoma for 40 years. Houses are square. That's how it's done. This round nonsense is going to fall down first. Strong wind we get." But Elena kept building. She'd bought this 10-acre plot 6 months ago with the insurance money from Robert's death. Her husband had been gone 2 years now, killed in a construction accident in Tulsa. The money wasn't much, but it was enough for land and materials if she did all the work herself. The real estate agent had tried to talk her out of it. "Ma'am, this is tornado country. You sure you want to build out here, and without a contractor, and in a circle?" She'd been sure. More than sure. She'd spent months in the library, researching, reading everything she could find about circular structures. The Mongolian yurts that withstood brutal winds, the Native American teepees designed to shed wind and weather, the historical roundhouses of Europe that had stood for centuries, and most importantly, she'd read about wind dynamics, about how circular structures presented no corners for wind to catch, how they distributed stress evenly, how aerodynamic design could make all the difference. Her plan was simple: a circular log cabin, 24 feet in diameter, built with her own hands. The logs were red cedar, purchased from a mill 60 miles away and delivered in October. She'd spent weeks preparing the foundation, a circular concrete pad she'd poured herself, working in sections, following instructions from library books and asking questions at the hardware store. The hardware store owner, Bill, had been skeptical but helpful. "I'll sell you the materials, but I think you're making a mistake." "Round walls? How are you going to fit furniture? How are you going to hang cabinets?" "Lady, there's a reason houses are rectangular." But Elena had her plans drawn out carefully on graph paper, dozens of detailed sketches showing every angle and measurement. The interior would be open concept, with a central support beam and a conical roof that would distribute weight evenly across the circular walls. Curved cabinets could be built using bent plywood techniques she'd learned from boat building manuals. Furniture could be arranged radially, creating natural flow and movement through the space. Every piece would have its place. Every corner, or rather, every curve, would be utilized efficiently. She'd calculated the square footage, 452 square feet of interior space, which was actually more usable than a rectangular cabin of similar dimensions because there were no wasted corner spaces. It would work. She knew it would work. By early November, she'd laid the first courses of logs, creating a circular wall about 4 feet high. Each log had to be carefully notched and fitted, the circle maintained with precise measurements from the center point. It was exhausting work. She'd rise before dawn, feed Daniel breakfast, bundle him in winter clothes, and work until dark. Her hands were covered in calluses and splinters. Her back ached constantly. But the wall was rising, log by log, day by day. The neighbours thought she was insane. Beth Carson had come over with a casserole in October, a kind gesture wrapped in concern. "Elena, honey, we're worried about you. This building project, it's too much for a woman alone. And this design, it's unusual. Have you thought about just buying a trailer home? They're affordable and they're already built. Elena had thanked her for the casserole, but refused the advice. I need to do this myself. I need to build something for Daniel, something strong and permanent. I can't explain it, but I know this is right. The church ladies had gossiped. Elena had overheard them after Sunday service. Poor thing, she's still grieving. Making bad decisions, that circular cabin idea, is just desperate thinking. She'll realize her mistake when winter really hits, and she's still living in that drafty construction site. The local contractor, a man named Jim who'd built half the houses in the county, had actually stopped by to lecture her. Look, I respect your determination, but this is dangerous. You're not a builder. You're a widow with a kid, trying to play construction worker. And this round design? It's not going to work. When tornado season comes, and it will come, that structure is going to come apart. You need corners for structural integrity. You need proper rectangular framing. This is foolishness. But Elena had done her research. She knew that corners were actually weak points. She knew that wind hitting a flat wall created pressure that could tear a building apart. She knew that curved surfaces deflected wind, letting it flow around rather than pressing against. She just couldn't make anyone else believe it. Daniel, at least, believed in her. Or maybe he just believed in his mother, which amounted to the same thing. He was her constant companion, her little helper. He'd hand her tools, hold stakes steady, stack wood chips for kindling, and ask endless questions about why logs fit together the way they did. "Mama, will it be warm?" he asked, one particularly cold November morning, as snow fell steadily. "Very warm," Elena promised. "The round shape means heat won't get trapped in corners. It'll circulate better. And see how thick these logs are? They'll hold heat like a blanket." By December, the walls were up to 8 feet. Elena had installed the door frame, an arched opening made from bent wood, and had begun framing the windows. She'd decided on small circular windows, like portholes, spaced evenly around the structure. They were unusual, but they fit the design and would provide plenty of light. The roof was the next challenge. She'd designed a conical roof, steep-pitched to shed snow and rain, with a central support pole and radiating rafters. It would be covered in wooden shingles she'd cut herself from cedar planks. Christmas came and went. They celebrated in the small trailer Elena had parked on the property, the kind Jim had suggested she should just live in permanently. But Elena knew the difference between temporary shelter and a real home. The trailer was cramped, cold, and depressing. The round cabin would be spacious, warm, and beautiful. She worked through January, through February, through March. The neighbours continued to mock. Tom Carson had started calling it the silo whenever he mentioned it. "How's the silo coming, Elena? You planning to store grain in there?" His teenage son had been crueler, driving past with his friends and shouting, "Hey lady, your house looks like a UFO. When's it taking off?" But the structure was taking shape beautifully. By April, the roof was complete, the windows were installed, and Elena had begun work on the interior. She'd built a central stone fireplace with a chimney that ran straight up through the centre of the conical roof. Curved shelving lined the walls. She'd crafted a sleeping loft that followed the curve of the wall, accessible by a ladder. The kitchen would be compact but functional, with curved counters that followed the wall's arc. Daniel, now 6 years old, loved exploring the space. He'd run in circles, laughing at how his footsteps echoed. He'd climb to the loft and pretend it was a ship's crow's nest. He'd help his mother sand the floors, a task that took weeks because Elena insisted on doing it by hand. By May, they moved in. The cabin wasn't completely finished. There were still details to complete, trim to install, a porch to build, but it was livable, and it was beautiful. The interior was warm and inviting, with golden cedar logs forming the circular walls. The windows let in light from all directions, and because they were evenly spaced, the light was balanced and soft. The fireplace radiated heat efficiently, warming the entire space evenly. The curved walls created a sense of flow and movement that Elena found deeply satisfying. Daniel had his own space in the loft, where Elena had built him a curved bookshelf and a bed that fit perfectly against the wall's arc. She had her bed on the main floor, positioned near the fireplace. The kitchen was small but complete, with curved counters and cabinets she'd built herself. Everything fit together like a puzzle. But the neighbours weren't impressed. The mockery continued, perhaps even intensified now that they could see the finished product. "It looks like an oversized barrel," Beth Carson said to someone at church, not realizing Elena was behind her. "I mean, it's well built, I'll give her that, but it's just so odd. And you know what they say when tornado season comes, and we always get at least one bad storm. That shape is going to catch the wind like a sail. I'm worried for that little boy." Jim, the contractor, had stopped by in June to inspect the work. He'd walked around the cabin twice, peered in the windows, knocked on the logs, and finally shaken his head. "I'll admit, you built it solid, better than I expected. But Elena, you need to understand, this design isn't tested. When a tornado comes through, and one will eventually, this circular structure is going to be a problem. You've got no basement, no storm shelter. You're going to need to come to my place, or the Carsonses, when the sirens go off. Promise me you won't try to ride out a big storm in this thing." Elena had promised nothing. She'd smiled politely and thanked him for his concern, but inside she was frustrated. Didn't any of these people do research? Didn't they know that the Pantheon in Rome had stood for 2,000 years with its circular design? That geodesic domes could withstand hurricane-force winds? That aerodynamics favoured curves over angles? But she kept her frustration to herself and continued improving the cabin. She built a circular porch that wrapped around the entire structure, with a railing made from bent willow branches. She planted a garden in a spiral pattern radiating from the cabin. She installed rain gutters that followed the roof's curve. The cabin became a local curiosity. People would drive by slowly, pointing and taking pictures. Some were just curious, but many were openly mocking. Elena heard the whispers at the grocery store, the diner, the post office, the crazy widow and her round house, that weird cabin that looks like a grain silo. Poor kid, growing up in that oddity. Daniel was aware of it too. Other kids at school would tease him about his weird house. But Elena taught him to be proud of what they'd built. Unusual doesn't mean wrong, Mijo. Different doesn't mean bad. We built something special, something strong. Let them laugh. We know the truth. Summer passed into fall. The cabin proved comfortable and efficient. The curved walls meant no dead spots for air circulation. The round design meant the morning sun hit the eastern windows. The afternoon sun warmed the southern side, and the evening light came from the west, a natural progression that made the day feel balanced and complete. But November brought the reminder that this was Oklahoma, tornado country, storm season. The first severe weather watch came on a Tuesday evening. Elena listened to the radio as the announcer described a storm system moving in from the west, conditions favourable for severe weather and possible tornado formation. Tom Carson called, "Elena, this is serious. You and Daniel need to come over here. We've got a proper basement. That cabin of yours, no offence, but it's not going to protect you if a tornado comes through." Elena looked at her solid log walls, at the strong structure she'd built. "We'll be okay, Tom, but thank you. Elena, don't be stupid. This isn't about pride." "It's not about pride. It's about trust. I built this cabin to withstand storms. I know what I'm doing." Tom had sighed in exasperation. "Fine. But when that siren goes off, you better come running to my place. I'm serious, Elena. I don't want to find you and that boy hurt because you were too stubborn to accept help." The storm that night had been intense but passed to the north. No tornado touched down in their area, but the incident started a conversation in the community. People began actively pressuring Elena to accept that her cabin wouldn't survive a real tornado. The local emergency management coordinator had even stopped by. "Ma'am, I understand you've built a unique structure here, but for safety purposes, I need to ask if you have a storm shelter plan. When tornado warnings are issued, where do you intend to take shelter?" "Here," Elena had said simply. "In my cabin." The coordinator had looked at her like she was suggesting they shelter in a tent. "Ma'am, with all respect, this structure isn't rated for tornado safety. The circular design is unproven. You need to identify a safe location, a basement, a storm cellar, a designated shelter. I can provide you with a list of community shelters. I appreciate your concern, but we'll be staying here." He'd left shaking his head, and Elena knew he'd filed some kind of report marking her as a non-compliant resident or something similar. The mockery reached a peak that December when the local newspaper ran a feature on unusual architecture in the county. Elena's cabin was included, with a photo and a description that made it sound like a folly. "Local widow builds circular log cabin despite expert warnings about structural unsoundness in tornado-prone region." The article quoted Jim, the contractor. "While the construction appears solid, the circular design is unproven and potentially dangerous in severe weather. Conventional rectangular construction has stood the test of time for good reason." Elena had wanted to write a rebuttal to explain the aerodynamic principles, the load distribution, the historical precedents, but Daniel had stopped her. "Mama, let them talk. Actions speak louder than words, right? That's what you always tell me." He was right. She filed the newspaper article away and continued living in her beautiful circular cabin. Winter passed. Spring arrived. And with spring came tornado season. April was unusually active. Several tornadoes touched down in neighboring counties. The Weather Service issued multiple watches and warnings. Each time, Tom Carson would call, begging Elena to bring Daniel to their basement. Each time, Elena politely declined. And then came May 14th. Elena would remember that day for the rest of her life. It started normally enough. She'd worked in the garden in the morning, had lunch with Daniel, and was preparing dinner when the radio announcer's voice changed tone. "A tornado watch has been issued for Cleveland, McLean, and Grady counties until 9 p.m. tonight. Conditions are extremely favorable for tornado development. A powerful storm system is moving through the area. Residents should be prepared to take shelter immediately if warnings are issued." Elena checked her emergency supplies, made sure the flashlights worked, filled extra water containers. Daniel watched with wide eyes, sensing his mother's seriousness. By late afternoon, the sky had turned an ominous green-grey. The air was heavy, oppressive. Birds had gone silent. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. The phone rang. Tom Carson, of course. "Elena, this is it. This is the big one. I can feel it. You need to bring Daniel here right now. I'm not asking. The sky looks bad. Really bad." Elena looked out her window at the approaching storm. She could see the dark wall cloud, see the rotation beginning to form. "Tom, we're staying here, but thank you. Make sure your family is safe." "Elena, God damn it, you're being crazy. That cabin is going to... She hung up gently. She couldn't argue with him now. She needed to focus on Daniel, on staying calm, on trusting what she'd built. At 6 p.m, the sirens went off. The tornado warning had been issued. A funnel had been spotted on the ground, moving northeast, directly toward their area. Elena gathered Daniel close. Remember what we talked about? About how strong this cabin is? About how the round shape lets wind flow around it? Daniel nodded, trying to be brave, but she could feel him trembling. We're going to be okay. Mama built this cabin to keep us safe. They sat in the center of the room, away from windows, near the fireplace. Elena held Daniel tight, praying she was right, praying that all her research and planning and building would prove true. The wind began to increase, not gradually, but suddenly, like someone had opened a door into hell. The howling was immediate and terrifying, a roar that sounded like a freight train, exactly like everyone always said. Elena had read accounts of tornadoes, heard survivors describe the sound, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. It was a living thing, this wind, a monster that wanted to devour everything in its path. The noise was so loud that she couldn't hear Daniel crying, though she could feel his body shaking against hers. She pressed his face against her shoulder, trying to shield him from the terror of what was happening outside their walls. The cabin began to shake. Elena felt the logs trembling against each other, felt the entire structure quivering under the assault of the wind, felt vibrations running through the floor beneath them. For a moment, just one terrible moment, she doubted. What if they were right? What if Tom and Jim and Beth and all the others had been correct all along? What if her circular cabin was just the folly everyone said it was? What if she'd built a death trap for herself and her son based on theories she'd read in books, untested in the real world? The doubt was like ice in her stomach, cold and nauseating. She held Daniel tighter and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. But then something remarkable happened. Through the windows, through the gaps around the door, Elena could actually see the wind. Not the wind itself, but its effects. Debris flying past, leaves and branches and pieces of buildings swirling in a grey vortex. And as she watched in amazement, she could see how the wind was hitting the circular wall of the cabin and flowing around it, deflecting off the curved surface instead of pressing against it. The roar intensified. The cabin shook harder. Something heavy hit the roof, probably a branch, and Daniel screamed. But the logs held. The walls stood firm. The circular design was doing exactly what Elena had intended, presenting no flat surface for the wind to catch, no corners where pressure could build, no weak points where the structure could be torn apart. And then the most incredible thing happened. Through the window, Elena saw it, the funnel itself, a massive grey column connecting sky to earth. Debris swirling around its base like a skirt. It was perhaps a quarter-mile away, moving directly toward them. She held Daniel tighter, preparing for the impact. But as she watched, the tornado's path began to curve. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but definitely, unmistakably, it curved. The funnel, which had been heading straight for the cabin, bent its path, passing to their east by perhaps 300 yards. The wind was still terrible, still violent, but the core of the tornado, the part that destroyed everything it touched, missed them. It curved around them like water flowing around a stone in a stream. Elena watched in awe as the tornado continued northeast, watched as it hit Tom Carson's property directly. She saw his barn explode into splinters, saw his tractor lifted and thrown, saw pieces of his roof torn away and scattered. But the tornado didn't hit the cabin. It went around. The storm lasted another 10 minutes, the wind gradually decreasing, the roar fading. When silence finally returned, Elena and Daniel sat in the center of their circular cabin, unharmed, surrounded by solid walls that hadn't budged. She opened the door carefully. The devastation outside was shocking. Trees were down everywhere. Debris was scattered across the property. Her garden was destroyed, the spiral pattern obliterated. The porch railing was damaged, several willow branches torn away, but the cabin stood. Not a single log out of place, not a window broken, the conical roof intact, the structure solid. Within an hour, people began arriving. Tom Carson came first, his truck barely making it through the debris on the road. His face was white with shock. "Elena, my God, I saw it. I saw the tornado curve around your place. I was in my basement watching through the window well, and I saw it. It was coming right for you, and then it just moved, like your cabin was repelling it somehow." Other neighbors arrived, equally shocked. Beth Carson was crying, hugging Elena. "Your cabin is fine, completely fine. Our house lost half its roof. Jim's workshop is gone. The church lost its steeple, but your cabin, it's like the tornado avoided it on purpose." The local emergency coordinator arrived with his team. He walked around the cabin 3 times, examining it with professional scrutiny. Finally, he approached Elena with something like respect in his eyes. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do. I don't know if it was the circular design or pure luck, but this structure performed better in that tornado than any conventional building in its path. I'm going to recommend that our office study this design. This could change how we think about storm-resistant construction." News crews arrived the next day. The story was too good not to cover. Circular cabin survives direct tornado path, while conventional buildings destroyed. Elena was interviewed, photographed, filmed. She explained calmly about aerodynamics, about how circles deflect force, about how indigenous peoples had known these principles for centuries. Jim, the contractor, came by a week later. His workshop was being rebuilt in a rectangular design, naturally, but he was humble. "Elena, I was wrong, dead wrong. I've been building conventionally for 30 years, and I never questioned whether there might be a better way. Your cabin stood up to an F3 tornado. I've seen conventional houses I built myself, completely destroyed by less. I don't understand the physics of how it worked, but I saw the result. I'm sorry I doubted you." Tom Carson had become her biggest advocate. He'd lost his barn and a significant portion of his house, but his family had survived in their basement. "I watched that tornado curve around your place," he told anyone who would listen. "I've lived in Oklahoma my whole life, seen a dozen tornadoes, and I've never seen anything like it. That cabin changed the airflow somehow, redirected the wind. Elena knew what she was doing all along, and we were too stubborn to listen. Universities sent researchers to study the cabin. Meteorologists came to interview Elena and analyze the tornado's path. Architects came to measure and photograph the structure. Her circular cabin became famous, featured in journals and documentaries about innovative, storm-resistant design. But for Elena, the validation wasn't really the point. She'd built the cabin because she believed in it, because she'd done the research and understood the principles, because she needed to create something strong and permanent for her son. The tornado had simply proven what she'd known all along. That summer, she finished the repairs to the porch and rebuilt her garden in its spiral pattern. Daniel, now 7, helped plant the seeds. As they worked, he asked, "Mama, why did you really build it round? Was it just for the wind?" Elena smiled. "That was part of it. But mostly, I built it round because your father always said that life isn't linear. It's circular. Seasons come around again. Problems and solutions cycle. Joy and sorrow alternate. Building a circular home felt like honouring that truth. Plus," she added, ruffling his hair, "it's beautiful, and we deserved something beautiful." That fall, 3 other families in the area began building circular homes, consulting with Elena on the design. She'd become an unlikely expert, sought after for her knowledge. But she always reminded people that she hadn't invented anything. She'd simply listened to centuries of human wisdom and applied basic physics. The following spring, another tornado touched down near their property. Elena and Daniel watched from their windows as it approached, watched as it once again seemed to deflect around the cabin, as if the building created some kind of aerodynamic shield. The wind was violent, the noise terrifying, but they were safe inside their circular walls. This time, no one called her crazy. No one suggested she should have built a conventional rectangular house. Instead, Tom Carson called after the storm to ask, "Elena, would you consider helping me design a circular barn to replace the one I lost? I figure if the principle works for your house, it might work for me too." Years passed. Daniel grew up in the circular cabin, bringing friends home who marveled at its unique design. Elena continued to refine and improve the structure, adding features, experimenting with curved furniture designs, creating a home that was both functional and beautiful. She never remarried. She'd occasionally joke that she'd built the perfect relationship, a circular house that protected her, required maintenance but never talked back, and deflected storms both literal and metaphorical. But the real joke was on everyone who'd mocked her. The widow who'd built a crazy circular cabin had proved that sometimes the unconventional answer is the right answer. That sometimes being different means being better. That sometimes the world needs people willing to build in circles while everyone else is thinking in squares. The cabin stood for decades, surviving storm after storm, season after season. It became a landmark, a tourist attraction, a symbol. But most importantly, it was home. Warm, safe, strong, and exactly what Elena had intended it to be from the very first log. The neighbors had laughed when she built her cabin in a perfect circle. But the tornado had passed around it, and in doing so, had proven what Elena had known all along. Sometimes the strongest shape is the one that doesn't fight the wind, but lets it flow around like water around a stone, natural and inevitable and perfectly designed.